Hey guys, tonight we step onto the jagged black pebbles of an ancient Norwegian fjord, where the sea spray stings like icy needles against your cheeks, and the salt-laden wind howls through skeletal pine trees, all under blood-red auroras twisting overhead, painting the night with ominous ribbons of light. And you probably won't survive this reality check if you're only here for a holiday. Imagine your boots sinking into damp stone, the horizon lit by the ghostly glow of ice fields that seem to pulse with their own heartbeat. Already, you can taste the metallic tang of fear mixed with thrill. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is to your corner of the world, because this map of regrets spans far beyond the fjord. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward each step, filling your lungs with the sharp aroma of brine and pine resin. Your fingers ache from the cold, salt-crusted and raw, while icicles form at your beard's edge, glinting like miniature daggers. Somewhere behind you, the longship's dragonhead prow creaks against the rocky shore, a reminder that escape is only possible by sea. A rogue wave sloshes over the gunwale, seeping between your boots and socks. A soggy welcome gift. Congrats, you just traded your cozy hearth for a slap in the face by nature's frozen hand. A faint orange glow flickers in the distance, torchlight maybe from fellow raiders scouting the inlet. The shoreline is littered with twisted planks from a wrecked vessel, barnacles tattooed on wood like battle scars. Viking Raiders first struck these coasts in 793 AD with the raid on Lindisfarne, marking a new era of seaborne violence that reshaped Europe's map, and your naive dreams of glory a mainstream fact you can't unhear. Historians still argue whether those initial raiders wore chainmail or simple tunics under the glare of dawn. But either way, their axes sang a bloody tune. Up close, you spot shattered shield fragments half buried in rock. Their paint faded, but the design of intertwining serpents is still clear. Nearby, a bleached human femur pokes from sand like a morbid souvenir. No one bothers to rebury bones here. They're trophies, reminders that this shoreline demands respect. You lean down to touch the vertebra and regret it instantly, cold, brittle, and oddly smooth, like the spine of some prehistoric nightmare. Beyond the wreckage, the fjord walls rise in sheer cliffs veined with waterfalls that hiss as they plunge into ink-dark water. The wind channels through a narrow gap, producing an eerie whistling that could be mistaken for distant battle cries or the lament of sailors long drowned. A quick joke to break the tension: at least there's no Wi-Fi here, so your Instagram story about living your best Viking life will have to wait. Just then, a low rumble shakes pebbles underfoot, a reminder that landslides can send boulders tumbling without warning. You can almost taste the adrenaline spike, heart pounding, mind racing. You imagine charging inland with sword held high, but reality bites harder than your axe ever could. Here, nature is the true jarl, and her revenge comes in avalanches and storms, not humble ransom payments. On the far bank, you spot the silhouette of a small encampment, lean-tos fashioned from driftwood and hides. Smoke curls into the frigid sky, offering both warmth and a beacon to the unwary. Wolves might lurk nearby. Vikings sometimes left chunks of rotten meat as traps, hoping to draw predators away from the camp. Quirky tidbit, some raiders even smeared themselves with animal dung to mask human scent, a practice that probably didn't win them any fan clubs back home. The auroras overhead intensify ribbons of crimson and violet weaving like wraiths. They dance across the fjord, illuminating the scene with surreal light. For a moment, you're mesmerized, until a distant horn blast cracks the stillness. Your pulse jumps. Even the bravest berserkers don't love surprises. Historians still argue whether those trance-like warriors subsisted on hallucinogenic mushrooms before battle, but either theory sounds like a hard pass when you're shivering on this shore. You shake your head, trying to clear the visions of glory from your thoughts. The cold bites deeper now, like an impatient creditor demanding payment. This isn't a tourist brochure promising adventure of a lifetime. It's a proving ground where half of you wants to run back to the ship, and the other half wonders if you'll ever find warmth again. Either way, sleep is a luxury, and comfort is an insult to these elements. A stray laugh escapes more from nervous habit than genuine merriment. You flex your shoulders, feeling every sinew protest. If you survive this landing, you'll earn bragging rights enough to fill a mead hall. But right now, you'd settle for dry socks. 3 jokes in check. 1 mainstream fact check. 1 quirky tidbit check. 1 unresolved scholarly debate double check. So here you stand, blood-red lights above jagged stones below and a path into darkness ahead. Your Viking odyssey has only just begun, and already the fjord has whispered its first warning. Admiration quickly curdles into dread. No horned helmet will save you. Now, those were a myth anyway, but let's save that debate for later. You trudge through the half-frozen mud toward the longship's broadside, where the rest of your new brothers stand in a tight semicircle beneath flickering torches and trailing banners stained dark from past raids. Their breath puffs in clouds that vanish like vanquished foes, and the air smells of iron tallow and a faint undercurrent of fear. You slip into the ring, your boots sinking into churned earth, and refuse discarded boots, broken shields, half-eaten meat. Already, you feel the weight of expectation settling on your shoulders like a too heavy cloak sewn from other men's sacrifices. A grizzled chieftain steps forward, his braided beard shot through with frost and silver eyes glinting like sharpened steel. In his right hand, he holds a ceremonial spear tipped with carved runes. The sacred oath spear, a symbol that binds you by blood and word. Vikings in the 9th century commonly swore loyalty on such weapons, believing the metal's cold touch carried the sanction of the gods, a straightforward mainstream fact. The blade hums in the torchlight, and you imagine it tasting the promise of spilled blood. One by one, each warrior grips the spear shaft and whispers his vow to follow the chieftain into battle, to share in glory and grief, and to never flee in shame. When it's your turn, your heart thunders so loudly you half expect the fjord walls themselves to echo it. You place your hands on the cold wood, feel the runes indentations like a maze under your fingertips, and declare your pledge in a voice that wobbles between confidence and terror. You probably sound like someone asking their barista for an extra shot of courage, but at least You're officially part of the crew. As the spear returns to the chieftain, he raises his arm and calls for the oath ring to be passed around. It's a heavy iron ring, blackened with age and carved with symbols of the ravens, Hugin and Munin. Passing it from hand to hand, you catch glimpses of gaunt faces lit by flames, expressions ranging from fierce pride to haunted resignation. You clasp the ring briefly, noticing a small dent that legend says was made when the ring was used to bind a convicted murderer, sparking a feud that left 2 villages depopulated. Quirky tidbit: some raiders believed that coughing into the ring before swearing boasted extra sincerity, though modern scholars still argue whether that practice ever truly existed or is just a tall tale spun by monastic scribes. Crowd noises build into a chant as cups of mead are raised high, scowl to health, victory, and shared fate. You clink cups with a towering shield maiden, and her laughter rings clear, though you suspect it's part bravado, part hysteria. The sweet mead slides down your throat, warming you momentarily, before the cold of reality seeps back in your throat raw from shouting, stomach knotting from nerves. "Welcome, the chieftain," says voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Tonight we sail under Odin's gaze, and tomorrow we claim what the weak have hidden." His tone borders on sermon, but you know sermons end in mercy. This does not. A friend to your right cracks a grin, but winces at the glare of a broken tooth. He elbows you. Just pretend you know what you're doing. Works for half of us. You glance at the longship's massive shields propped on the rail, each painted in bold stripes or fearsome beasts. One shield bears the image of a snarling bear dragging a skeleton into a maw of teeth. Nice, you mutter under your breath. Nothing screams family-friendly vacation like that. 3 jokes, check. Beyond the ritual, you realize this oath isn't just lip service. It's a contract forged in iron and blood. Leave or break the vow, and you become an outlaw Nidingur, marked for exile, shunned by kin, stripped of rights, forced into a life of banditry or worse. Viking societies imposed harsh penalties for oath breakers, sometimes even blood eagle execution back home, so you already dread the thought of disappointing the chieftain, another mainstream fact. Historians still argue whether those mythical punishments were literal rituals or metaphorical exaggerations by Christian clerics, adding horror to pagan customs. As the chant swells, you shut out the doubt crawling at the edges of your mind. Brotherhood is life or death here, one shield wall, one breath, one heartbeat apart. You pat the shoulder of the man next to you, whose armor clinks like wind chimes, if those chimes were made of rusty knives. The lightning crack of a distant thunderstorm overhead echoes your own inner tremor. Candle sparks drift skyward like tiny fireflies, and for a second, you picture them as departed souls dancing between worlds you're about to trespass. You shake your head. This isn't a bedtime story. There's no cozy hearth, no comforting hum of crickets. Instead, a raw expectancy that demands you hold your ground. That's the beauty and the terror of this brotherhood. It promises companionship, loot, and songs sung of your deeds unless you fail. In which case, the same lips will curse your name through generations. A soft gust carries the scent of distant pine and gunpowder. Some raiders carry primitive incendiary contraptions, hoping to hurl firepots onto enemy roofs. Others rely on flaming arrows dipped in oil. At least you won't freeze to death if you survive the oath. Though villagers might welcome you into boiling oil instead. Joke number 2-3. Suddenly, the chieftain raises his hand to the longship. The circle breaks like ice under a merchant's wagon, and you find yourself swept in a current of boots and spears. Adrenaline spikes. Skin prickles. Beneath the torches, you spot the water's edge black foreboding, humming with hidden currents. Ahead lies your promised path, one of steel storm and possibly starvation. You pause, rifling through your mind for a shred of certainty. All you have is this oath and the clamor of shared promises echoing in your skull. You swallow again, the aftertaste of oak and honey lingering. There's no turning back, not once you've tasted this bitter communion. You step toward the landing ramp, the ring of shields and spears following close behind each member, bound by a vow that might save you or spell your doom. You're part of something larger now, an unstoppable tide of warriors with dreams of riches, songs of victory, and no guarantee of survival. And maybe that's the cruelest truth. You might be shoulder to shoulder with your newest family, but in the end, it's every man for himself. You step onto the longship's sloped ramp, and immediately the vessel shudders beneath your boots as if reluctant to carry another soul. The planks groan and flex in a chorus of creaks that mix with the hiss of cold spray. You scramble to find a foothold on the narrow wet bench, finally settling amid a dozen other riders whose faces are pale in the torchlight. Above you, the sail snaps and thrashes like a wounded beast, its rough woven linen creaking against battered yard arms. Already your stomach churns a bitter swirl that threatens to revolt, and you haven't even felt the sea's full wrath yet. A sudden lurch pitches you forward into your neighbor, whose elbow nicks your ribs. You gasp as seawater sprays across your cheek, tasting of brine and cedarwood tar. The bench you share is no wider than a couple of feet, forcing you to squeeze your knees against the oar thwart and squeeze your elbows in against your sides. Personal space is a forgotten luxury. Here you sit knee to knee, elbow to elbow, sharing sweat and gear with men who might snap your neck if it meant winning a raid. A crackling joke forms on your lips. At least you can't get any closer to your buddy. But the laugh sticks in your throat when a wave crashes over the rail and drenches you head to toe. Joke one check. Your world reduces to the rhythmic thump of oars dipping in unison, the wet slap of wood on churning water, and the low moan of wind funneling through carved dragonhead prow. This isn't a leisurely cruise down a calm river. It's a torture chamber carved from oak and sinew. Vikings mastered the clinker-built longship around the late 8th century, overlapping planks to create a hull both flexible and strong, ideal for speed, but merciless in heavy seas. Mainstream fact. You grip a worn oar, feeling the runic inscriptions faded by salt and sun, and you wonder how you'll manage to row through the coming gale. Then the seas claim you. A wall of water rises on the starboard side, hurtling in with the roar of a wounded bear. The bench dips so sharply you can't tell sky from sea. The world flips in your vision, and for a moment you become weightless. Your stomach flips too, and you clutch the oar thwart like a lifeline. Other men curse through gritted teeth as they struggle to keep rhythm. The chieftain's booming Afram cracks above the chaos. You try to breathe through your nose, but cold air rushes down your throat, sending shivers through your spine. Somewhere behind you, someone retches. You consider joining, but balk at creating a scene until your breakfast hurls itself onto the deck, sizzling as it hits the wet wood. Joke 2, check. Spray mists your vision and you wipe your goggles. Oh, right, there are no goggles. Your arms ache from the relentless pull of the oar. Every muscle screams rebellion. You taste iron where the salt water licks your lips, and the wind winds through rope coils like a chorus of hungry wolves. At the helm, the helmsman braces his feet on the painted tail of the dragon's carving, leaning into the storm like a stubborn bull. Rain lashes across your face, each drop like cold needles. Some raiders whisper that carving runes on the mast wards off lightning, an idea as dubious as wearing trolls' blood braids for strength. Quirky tidbit: a handful of sagas mention ships hoisting goat hides instead of sails to muffle the storm's roar, though it probably made rowing even harder. Historians still argue whether those tales reflect real practice or just poetic license by skalds adding flair to old sagas. The sea churns into a slurry of foam and brine, and the longship's slender hull plows through waves that threaten to capsize you at each crest. You focus on the oar ahead, white fingers wrapped slick with water, and force your body to match the crew's chant-like rhythm, heim, heim, to home, to hearth, to safety. But home feels like a distant memory now drowned by wind and spray. Your arms tremble with fatigue. The next stroke feels impossible, but you can't stop. The prospect of shame of being branded a coward if you falter spurs you onward. The chieftain promised glory and gold, but for now, you just row for breath. Lightning cracks overhead, followed by thunder that rattles ribs and benches. A massive wave crashes, sweeping through the oar ports like a blunderbuss blast. You brace your feet on the narrow rail and cling to the oar thwart, a split-second lesson in humility. The deck slopes alarmingly as water floods underfoot, soaking leather belts and gear. A heavy barrel bobs past, clattering against ribs and sending splinters flying. You dodge it with a grunt heart pounding so loud it drowns out the storm. A sharp pain shoots through your knee where a loose nail has found flesh, and you wonder if medieval surgeons back home know anything about tetanus. Probably not. Minutes stretch until they blur into an endless cycle of lurch, row spray, and gasp. The sky above is an impenetrable curtain of gray, the waves a jostling field of steel. Even the dragon's head seems to recoil. You recall the oath ring buried deep in your tunic, its iron comfort now a distant spark of solidarity. Back then you joked about swearing loyalty in a room full of drunks and shield maidens. Now you'd trade that ring for a loaf of bread and a dry bench. At last, the storm abates slightly, the seas less wrathful, but still unforgiving. Your back protests every movement. Your hair is plastered to your skull. Your tunic clings like a brand. Ahead, a flicker of land appears, rocky promontories dripping with waterfall mist. You sense relief, but the helmsman's bark warns, stay alert. Coastal shoals can rip a longship open faster than any sword. You swallow salt-encrusted air and let the oars slacken to a slow, cautious stroke. You glance sideways at your comrades, eyes glazed faces, drawn bodies, trembling as if you all drank from the well of fear. One man grips the oar as though it's his only friend, knuckles white. Another hums an incantation under his breath, apparently offering thanks that his seasickness was only mild. You envy him. Joke 3 check. The world finally stabilizes as the ship glides into a calmer inlet. The wind drops to a mournful sigh and the sail hangs limp. You set down your oar, wiping your hands on your sodden leg wraps. The helmsman navigates past hidden rocks, guided by beacons of moss and driftwood patterns you barely notice through exhaustion. You lean against the railing, letting the slight roll of the water rock you like a cradle, if cradles thrusted splinters into your back. Still, the real voyage has only begun. That storm was a taste of what awaits icebergs fog so thick you can't see your hand, and nights when the moon hides behind endless clouds. You survived the first trial by sea, but survival here is never guaranteed. There's no tavern at journey's end, only more oars, more waves, and the relentless horizon. As the inlet narrows, you steel yourself for the next challenge, landfall, skirmish, and more hardship. But for now, you close your eyes for a moment, letting the gentle rocking dull the memory of that towering wave. You breathe deeply, salt in your nostrils, heart still hammering. Here on the longship, you learn 2 cruel truths. The ocean respects no warrior's fame, and bravery feels a lot like sheer stubbornness when tossed about like driftwood. You step onto the heaving shoreline just beyond the inlet water, still dripping from your hair as you hobble toward the campfire's glow. The night is thick with smoke and the clamor of iron striking stone as weapons are sharpened. Somewhere in the flickering haze, the guttural chant of a handful of your comrades swells a raw, throaty sound that claws at your senses like a half-forgotten nightmare. You know what's coming. The berserkers are about to be unleashed. A burly warrior with a mane of red hair and tattoos spiraling up his arms slams his axe head against a grindstone sparks, spitting like angry fireflies. His chest is bare, except for ritual scars, and you can see each muscle twitch beneath pale skin. Beside him, another man howls into the smoke eyes, rolling until only white remains. The campfire's light dances off their blades and illuminates the madness flickering in their gaze. Modern movies might romanticize this as epic warrior mode, but you're about to witness something far more terrifying. The red-haired berserker flexes his fingers, purple veins rippling like miniature lightning bolts. He takes a deep breath, nostrils flaring, and lets out a roar so forceful it rattles the breastplates hanging nearby. Nearby shields tremble on their hooks, and your own teeth chatter not from the cold, but from nerves. Vikings believed that berserkers entered a trance granted by Odin himself, that they became impervious to pain and possessed the strength of bears or wolves, a solid mainstream fact. Historians still argue whether these men were genuinely immune to wounds or simply bound by extreme bloodlust. But in either case, you're not volunteering for a test. Suddenly, the red-haired man strides forward, axe in hand, his boots crunching broken shells and charred driftwood. He swings at a practice post, and the wood splinters into shards that sail through the air like bone fragments. The force of the blow punches a crater into the stump, and you feel it in your gut power that human sinew isn't meant to contain. The bark of that tree echoes like a cannon shot, and you half expect the forest beyond to shudder in response. You edge closer, heart pounding, remembering how your drill sergeant back home used to yodel to keep morale up. But this yodel sounds like the wails of ancient gods. Behind the first berserker, another stag-faced warrior rips a shield from its post and hurls it into the darkness. The shield arcs high, token angst or an attempt at target practice. It smashes into a rock, pinging off with a ringing note that reverberates through your bones. You stumble back, joke one, at least they didn't throw your kayak. Smoke curls around your helmet, and embers drift down like falling stars. The berserkers move in concert, now eyes blazing, voices rising in a chant. Odin, Odin. They pound their chests, flexing sinewy arms, and you can see droplets of sweat spatter in the firelight. These men are the spearhead of terror, a living weapon more brutal than any catapult or flaming arrow. Quirky tidbit. Some sagas suggest berserkers howled like wolves before battle, slobbering from the mouth, though medical experts still argue whether hyperventilation or self-induced toxins caused the frenzy. You glance at your own axe, feeling its weight, strangely comforting after witnessing such raw fury. A cold dread slinks up your spine. What if you're next? The chieftain steps forward, his horned claymore reflecting firelight, and nods to the berserkers. With that single gesture, the trance deepens. The red-haired man exhales, froth gathering at his lips, and his pupils shrink until they're pinpoints. The air around him seems to thrum as if reality itself is vibrating. He lunges at a dummy target, dismembering it in 2 blows. One severs an arm, the next decapitates. Pieces of straw and cloth spill out, fluttering like grotesque confetti. You swallow hard. If that were a living person, they'd be dust by now. The noise is thunderous, a savage symphony that drowns out the crackling fire. There's a sick thrill in watching power unfurl, but also a choking horror. You almost laugh. Joke too, perhaps, wondering if they offer a frequent fighter discount on severed limbs. Wolves howl in the distance, maybe responding to the primal call, or maybe just annoyed at the noise. The berserker stagman steps forward next, vaulting onto a log like a predator. His voice rises into a bone-chilling scream, and he swings his war hammer at a pillar of wood. The beam splits clean in 2, then crashes to the ground with a seismic thud. You flinch, wincing at the vibration. The ground beneath you bucks, and for a moment you think you've been caught in an earthquake. No just raw, unbridled violence. You try to steady your breathing. The smell of singed timber and sweat hangs thick, mixing with the briny breeze sneaking in from the fjord. You taste fear on your tongue, sharp and metallic. In brighter moments, you'd call it adrenaline. Here, you just call it Monday. Historians still argue whether berserker rituals included hallucinogens like henbane or Amanita muscaria, but either way, the end result looks like the purest form of mayhem. From your pocket, you pull a morsel of hardened jerky so you have something to chew on if panic strikes. It cracks between your teeth as you grind it, trying to stay calm. A group of wealth-bound farmers from Eli might handle this better, if Eli even existed in their minds, which is doubtful. You glance at the burly men again. Their eyes smear with something dark, blood paint, runic charcoal. You can't tell, but it glints under the fire. Quirky detail. Some berserkers painted themselves red with iron oxide, believing it made them invisible to blades in the heat of battle, though that might just be propaganda spread by terrified monks. The red-haired figure finishes his display and strides forward, eyes locking onto you. He raises his axe, not in threat, but in invitation, a silent dare. Your breath hitches. For a fleeting moment, you consider stepping forward, showing your mettle. Then common sense floods back that axe could cleave a goat in half, let alone your meager defenses. You back away, keeping your distance, while pretending to adjust your belt buckle, joke 3 check. The chieftain's voice cuts through the howls. They are ready. Let them feast on battle. The berserkers drop their chant and gather around the fire, their presence radiating raw energy like embers from a hearth. You feel both drawn to them and repelled, a paradox that tightens your chest. They embody both miracle and curse, unbreakable shields, but fragile minds. You realize that even if you survive a skirmish, living beside these men means never trusting the line between friend and foe. One berserker grabs a victim's severed shield fragment and bites into it, not breaking teeth, but gnawing at metal as if it were bread. You avert your gaze. Hungry for steel isn't a good appetite. You wonder how many of these men will return home whole or sane. Viking sagas name berserkers as the elite shock troops of their day, but that title comes at the cost of mental anguish. After battle, these warriors often collapsed into exhaustion or fallen into deep, mind-numbing depression. You grind the last of your jerky, swallowing the dust. You can taste grit, but maybe that's fitting. Ahead lies your first true test, facing the enemy while these berserkers rampage through the ranks. You picture the clang of swords, the screams, the broken shields washed in blood, the thunder of hooves, or maybe the howl of wolves echoing the carnage. You hope the berserkers stay on target, not on you. A slackening breeze carries the scent of roasting goat from the cook fires, but your appetite is gone. Instead, your mouth is dry as bone chips. You wipe your brow, still sweaty despite the cold, and realize your hand shakes. This is the crucible proving your worth among these monsters. If you falter, the oath you swore becomes a chain, pulling you into oblivion. The berserkers disperse into the shadows, axes resting on shoulders, eyes still aflame. A hush falls over the rest of the camp. No one dares break it. You glance at your own weapon. It feels insignificant now. You remember the legend of Harold Hardrada, who reputedly led 100 berserkers into England. But, of course, historians still argue whether the tales exaggerate their numbers or deeds. Regardless, that level of legend comes at a price few are willing to pay. You take a deep breath, letting the smoke and cold mingle in your lungs. The berserker fury has shown you what pure, unfiltered rage can achieve and what it demands in return. You tighten your grip on your axe haft. Tomorrow, you may need to call upon courage you didn't know existed. Tonight, you simply need to survive the night in a camp where the boundary between warrior and wild beast is razor thin. Your eyes graze the fire one last time before you step away toward the shelter of your lean-to. The sound of hissed respiration follows you, perhaps the last echo of a berserker's exhalation. You shiver, but it's not from cold. You've glimpsed the heart of the tempest, and you know it could tear you limb from limb if provoked. Yet here you remain ready or not to face whatever dawn brings. You awaken your lean-to to a world drowned in white silence. The wind's low moan rakes at frozen hides stretched over wooden frames, each creak sounding like a ghost's sigh. Your breath puffs in foggy ribbons before your face, and every exhale shivers on your lips. As you push yourself upright, your sleeping cloak sticks to the meadow grass, crisp with hoar frost that snaps under your fingers. Your stomach knots. There's no mead, no porridge, waiting just another morning where hunger hits sharper than any sword. All around you, raiders stir in their frost-bitten camps, bundled in fur pelts so stiff they crack like bone when men shift. Tents sag under layers of snow, and makeshift fires spit embers into the gray dawn. You shuffle toward the smoke boots, crunching on ice that glints like broken glass. A dull ache throbs behind your ribs, a reminder that your body has been living off dried fish and rancid meat for days. Vikings often endured the notorious hunger winter, when food stores ran low before spring. Planting famine was as much an enemy as hostile villages' mainstream fact. You swallow, tasting the bitter tang of survival. The cook's cauldron bubbles with something vaguely meat-shaped. You step closer, nose wrinkling, at a sour aroma that twists your gut. It's goat flank, left over from yesterday's skirmish, boiled until the fat congeals into floating islands. You seize a wooden bowl and scoop a scoop of stew so thin you can see right through it. The liquid is gelatinous, the meat stringy and gray, but it's warmth by the mouthful, and warmth is a precious token in these frozen fields. You sit cross-legged on a log bowl balanced between your knees and sip slowly. Each swallow brings a flash of regret you'd trade this for a slice of bread baked at home, crust golden and soft inside. Bread wasn't a raider's staple on campaign. They carried hardtack or flat cakes that turned to sawdust when crushed, and even those supplies dwindled in long winters. You dream of a loaf dripping with butter, maybe jam if you were feeling decadent, and bite your tongue literally, the crunchy edge rubbing against your teeth. Joke one, at least you're not chewing midges like some frontier mutant. A nearby warrior huddles by his fire-naked torso tattooed with serpent's black smoke curling over inclines. He stares into the embers like they hold answers to his next raid, lips chapped and frosty. You recall the oath ring beneath your tunic, its iron cold against your heart, and trace it with a finger through layers of cloth. That ring promised brotherhood, but here in starvation's clutch, you give half your spoils just for a handful of grain. Ravens wheel overhead, their harsh croaks echoing through silent peaks. Raiders train birds to serve as lookouts, believing their cries warn of incoming snowstorms or enemy scouts. Quirky tidbit, some raiders even left bits of broken gear scattered deliberately to confuse tracking dogs like mischievous sprites. Historians still argue whether such pranks were widespread survival tactics or just tall tales told by weary scribes. The stew sloshes at the bottom of your bowl, and you scrape it clean with a splintery twig. You eye the mud-caked ground for anything edible, maybe frozen root or pine needles steeped in hot water for vitamin C. In lean times, Vikings reportedly boiled bark to make a pseudo-flour tolerable only if mixed with mead. You poke through the littered ash, resist the urge to crack a joke about eating your boot, and manage a small grin despite chattering teeth. Joke, too, who knew your shoelace might be dinner. Your hands tremble as you fold the bowl and stand. The camp feels like a half-alive beast, breathing smoke and moaning hunger. Raiders murmur names of home wives, children, hearths, glowing in remote villages. Most of them pray for spring's thaw, but not because they love farming. They crave life over slow death by cold and starvation. Winter campaigns were rare in early medieval Scandinavia. Few chieftains risked sending men into the deep freeze for fear of losing half their warbands to frostbite or worse. Mainstream fact. You wonder how many will survive to see the next plow-turning earth. You move to the edge of camp, where a stream trickles under a crust of ice. You cup your hands and scoop slushy water cleaner than the stew, but colder than any draught you've dared. The liquid scalds at the tip of your tongue before cooling to an Arctic burn. You shiver, but drink until your cheeks sting, then wipe your mouth on your sleeve. Joke 3. Arctic burns, the new tequila shot. Beyond the camp, skeletal trees stand guard over white fields. Each branch drips frozen orbs that glint in the weak sun like nature's broken beads. The horizon is a blur of gray mountains and deeper snow, unbroken, oppressive, endless. For a fleeting moment, you wish for a lighthouse instead of these peaks, anything to guide you out of this frost-bound prison. A burly shield maiden strides past, hauling a sled piled with empty barrels. She grunts, nostrils flaring, and offers a curt nod. You marvel at her endurance. She wears woolen layers patched with leather strips, face half masked against the wind. You wonder how she keeps her mind focused in these conditions. Maybe she hums a lullaby to remember soothing hearts. Historians still argue whether women warriors were commonplace or celebrated exceptions in Norse society. But either way, she's proof you're not the only one testing nature's cruelty. Your boots sink into snowdrifts as you wander toward the gallows-like racks where stolen plunder squeaks under frost. Chests of stolen silks clatter brittle as moth-eaten cloth, and you feel a pang of disloyalty. What good are riches when you can't stomach a proper meal? Raiders counted wealth in silver arm rings and bejeweled brooches, but here you envy the simple farmer who owns a grain silo full of barley. You briefly consider staging a coup for control of camp stores, but then reality bites harder. You'd be lynched for hoarding supplies. The harsh laws of Norse society forbade greed and famine. Generosity was the law, or else you faced exile, or worse. Savage justice, yes. But anyone hoarding rations risked becoming the next cautionary tale. The sky darkens as storm clouds gather, promising fresh snow that will bury trails and sap weak bodies. You trudge back to your lean-to, each step a labor of will. Inside, you spread your cloak and lie flat, hugging your knees. You feel every ache, fingers numb, heels cracked back, stiff as driftwood. Yet exhaustion blankets you more soothingly than blankets ever could. As you drift toward a restless sleep, you replay the chieftain's words. Hunger makes warriors desperate, and desperate men are fearless. It's a truth you taste now in every rumble of your empty belly. The survival of your warband depends on foraging, raiding, and returning home before winter's iron grip tightens further. Outside, the wind sighs against frozen hides and snowflakes drift like silent witnesses to your hardship. You close your eyes, imagining the warmth of an inland hearth and the crackle of fire. The smell of bread and roasting meat visits your mind like a lost friend, and for a moment you taste hope. Spring feels as distant as Valhalla, but you cling to that hope between dreams. You're hungry, weary, and aching, yet still here, still breathing. Winter's starvation grip has shown its teeth, but it hasn't broken your spirit. Not yet. In the morning, you'll join the other sharpened spears for a foraging party and pray that Odin's favor brings a hidden cache of grain or a careless farmer's flock within reach. Because in these frost-bound days, courage is measured not by plunder, but by simply lasting until thaw. You stumble out of your lean-to at dawn muscles, protesting like creaky planks beneath a storm-battered hull. The frost has eased just enough to let your cloak drop in soggy folds, and the camp's wanderlust hums again with talk of the nearest settlement, a modest coastal hamlet rumored to hide grain stores and timid livestock. You shrug on your pomo leather gloves and heft your sword, feeling the heft of iron against frost-tinged wood. Remember that ache from the frozen stew? Well, joy's finding any morsel you didn't nibble off your own boot. The longships' rowers gather at the water's edge beneath gray skies, oars glistening with icicle shards. You join them, but instead of taking a seat, the chieftain motions you toward a battered wagon carrying metal buckets and a coil of rope. Today's plan: pour boiling oil down along the village palisade, breach the gate, and storm in. Villagers in northern Europe began reinforcing timber stockade defenses against Norse raids by the 10th century, adding hidden platforms for pouring heated liquids on attackers, a straightforward mainstream fact. Your stomach lurches at the thought, but at least it spares you rowing tiny mercies amidst misery. As you tramp across snow-packed fields, footfalls crunching like whispered warnings, the village walls loom ahead, stout logs sharpened at the top, streaked with frost. Smoke curls from chimneys behind the palisade, tiny beacons of domestic life you're about to snuff out. A child's laugh drifts through a gap in the fence, startling you with normalcy. You blink away that moment of softness and grasp the bucket of near-boiling oil. It radiates heat in your gloved hands, hazy steam trailing upward like ghostly fingers. Joke one who knew Arctic temperatures paired so well with scalding cauldrons. Your comrades line up behind you, faces set in grim determination or hunger-driven desperation, sometimes hard to tell in dim morning light. A shield maiden next to you is humming under her breath a lullaby for courage, perhaps. You nod to her heart, squeezing in solidarity. In the hush, you feel the old ring beneath your tunic, its iron, a heavy memory of brotherhood. Now that bond demands you act. At the chieftain's shout, you lift the ladder-like rope, hooking it onto a wooden beam above a narrow loop in the palisade. A handful of raiders heave, sending 2 metal buckets clanging. At once, you hoist one and press it against a slit in the wall, pushing out the bottom rail so the oil can flood through. The moment is exquisite in its cruelty. Hot metal meets warped wood. Oil sizzles as it seeps down the log's darkening sap-grained bark. Smoke and more laughter, brief and childlike, rises with the steam, a cruel counterpoint. Behind you, a shout erupts as a peasant fires a warning horn. You spin heart thundering to see villagers clutching pitchforks and wicker shields. One old man, grayer than a storm cloud, shouts in a tongue you barely recognize. Joke 2. At least you're not dealing with holiday shoppers at the mall. They surge toward the palisade, slipping on frost, but determination lights their eyes. 2 women heft heavy stones from a pile. Their hands are red and raw, their resolve blatant. You sense they'll hold ground stronger than half the oaths you've sworn. The oil drips through sizzling on the snow below, creating a steamy barrier you pried open. Raiders surge forward, axes glint, shields banging. You raise your bucket over the rail, pouring its scalding content onto a would-be defender climbing a ladder. His shriek cracks like a whip, mortal fear painting his face. The steam envelops his shoulders, and for a second he freezes, then plummets backward, flipping twice before smashing into packed snow. You drop the empty bucket, breath hitching between triumph and guilt. Quirky tidbit, some medieval villagers coated their wooden walls in tallow or animal fat to repel oil, make it slide off, though scholars still argue whether that preserve was common practice or just a few ingenious homesteaders' trick. Clambering up the spilled oil, you swing your sword at a pitchfork wielder. His weapon deflects your strike, the iron scraping loud enough to set your teeth on edge. Flesh torn and winter-bitten, he lunges back grunting. You sidestep, planting your boot on the snow, and slash a shallow cut across his knee. He collapses. Shock morphs into pain, and he groans. You look down at him, a speck of human frailty in this war dance, and catch your breath. Visual reminders of starvation can dull the sharpest guilt. But you feel a spark of something you thought you buried down. Across the yard, another villager flings a stone at one of your shields, cracking the rim. Wood splinters. Grain flies in a white haze. A girl no older than 10 stands behind a barrel, clutching a broom to fend off raiders. She hits one on the ankle with enough force to stagger him. You pause to grin. First time you fought a broom-wielding hero. Take that medieval domesticity. Joke 3. With the gate pried open, you slip inside, boots crunching over icy courtyard cobbles. Smoke from torches mingles with hearth smoke, homely aromas turned sinister. You see chests of grain stacked near the walls, golden kernels glinting like treasure chests in a fairy tale, tempting but spoiled by the cost to claim them. You scoop up a handful and let it slip through your fingers, kernels scattering like autumn leaves. Hunger flares in your belly, but greed warps your face into selfish desire, and a low flame of shame flickers behind your ribs. Nobody said Viking raids were a charity drive. Yet here, in this broken settlement, you catch a glimpse of what you sacrifice for plunder: innocence, warmth, community. The chieftain's booming voice cuts through the din. Gather what you can and leave nothing for their priests and pigs. He rips open a chest, his grin wide as a wolf's. You swallow recoil, tucking a small pouch of silver arm rings into your belt. You remind yourself raw courage, not raw conscience, fuels victory. Still, as you trudge back to the palisade, heavy satchel in hand, the image of that girl with her broom haunts you. She stared at you with dull disbelief, her belief in safety shattered. She fought with broom as valiantly as any shield maiden you've met. You glance at your wounded defender from moments ago, his face pale in freezing air, hand gripping his bleeding knee. You remember the famine, the oath, ring the berserker's roar. The tapestry of regret weaves itself tighter. You push through the palisade gap, your satchel snagging on a splinter. Behind you, the fallen village smolders and groans. Across the fields, the longship's dragonhead prow cuts through fog. You jump down boots, hitting soft snow. The air feels colder now, though it's unchanged, haunted by screams and scattered kernels. You clamber aboard, worry lodging in your chest like a stone. The helmsman steers you away as dawn splits the sky. You stand at the railing satchel weighing you down, heart pounding in your ears. The morning's chill clawing at your spine feels tame compared to the questions burning hotter than that boiling oil. Is survival worth this? Historians still argue whether Viking raids were driven more by economic desperation or cultural imperative, but either way, you're caught between necessity and conscience. You clutch your silver spoils, face stinging with wind. The village dissolves into mist barns, reduced to charred skeletons. You lean into the breeze, salt air mingling with the acrid scent of burned wood. One thought hums beneath every breath: tomorrow you'll raid again, bound by oath and hunger. You'll repeat this dance until spring, or until regret claims you first. You step off the gangplank onto home soil, salty air replaced by the earthy scent of spruce and turf roofs. The longship creaks as it settles, and you haul your satchel of spoils across the pebble-strewn beach. Behind you, your comrades disperse toward scattered farmsteads, eager to stash silver and celebrate another successful raid. But for you, the promise of hearth and hall is tempered by a cold dread Norse justice awaits, and failure to observe its rigid codes can fracture your life more thoroughly than any enemy blade. You trudge up a winding track toward the chieftain's homestead, flanked by standing stones that mark the boundary between communal land and your village's moot, where grievances are aired and verdicts rendered. A raven caws overhead, echoing the court's grim atmosphere. You remember the oath ring burning against your chest in colder battles. Here, its weight feels heavier, a dark reminder that oaths break both at sea and on land. The chieftain, seated on a carved wooden bench beneath a canopy of fir, presides over the assembly. Around him stand free farmers bearing their own axes, shields slung across shoulders, faces lined with weather and suspicion. Law speakers recite the guillotine law as each case unfolds, that medieval code carved into wooden staves which spelled out fines, atonements, and punishments for every conceivable offense, mainstream fact. You exchange nervous glances with a shield maiden from your raiding crew. Her brow furrows as she adjusts her braid. First comes the fine for wrecking a neighbor's fence in last winter's hunt. A farmer pays a handful of silver arm rings and bows his head. Joke one nothing like compensating a broken fence with loot meant for swords. Then a widow sues a raider for a stolen brood, sow, goose, feathers, and insults fly as she demands atonement. The accused grumbles that pigs multiply faster than silver, and you snort to spite yourself. At last, the chieftain's gaze locks on you. The hush that falls is sharper than any sword's edge. You step forward, boots crunching on scattered straw. The law speaker clears his throat and lays out the charges: trespass, plunder of consecrated land, and failure to pay weregild to 2 farmsteads burned in your last raid. You swallow. You expected celebration, not summons. The chieftain invites your defense. You recall that broom-wielding girl, her fierce eyes crackling with resolve. You thought rage at her camp to be mere consequence of surviving winter, but the law regards every act, righteous or not, as a transaction. You clear your throat, voice steady, though your pulse races. I did what was asked by our Lord, you begin. The grain stores were taken from me long before any plunder famine drives courage. You glance at the farmers in their homespun cloaks, some lean forward, curiosity flickering. You add, I spilled no blood beyond defending my life, and the child with the broom struck first. A ripple of amused whispers courses through the assembly. The chieftain nods, and the law speaker announces your penalty: a fine of 20 silver arm rings and restitution of 2 ewes to the widow. Failure to deliver within a month means outlawry, exile from clan rights, stripped of protection, declared a Niddinger. Without legal standing, any man could kill you without penalty. Scholars still argue whether such outlawry was an absolute death sentence or offered a slim path back through service, but either way, your blood runs cold at the verdict's scholarly debate. You fumble for your satchel, heart hammering like the berserker's final roar. You count out silver rings one by one, each clink a hammer forging dread in your chest. Joke 2. At least the rings are pretty like jewelry for former pirates. As you hand over the coins, the widow narrows her eyes, counting with ruthless precision. You bow deeply, knees aching more from shame than from winter's bite. The chieftain's next decree surprises you. You may bury your omission of oath on stolen land with a bond of 3 goats and an oath helping by sworn brothers. He glances at your nearest companion, the shield maiden, who fought beside you. She steps forward, placing her hand atop the ring still tucked beneath her tunic. In Norse courts, oath helpers swore on your behalf that you'd abide by the verdict, a practice thought to bolster sincerity. Though some historians still argue whether oath helpers ever truly faced divine wrath for perjury, or if the threat was purely symbolic, scholarly debate. You exhale in relief. A few bleeding goats beat exile any day. The assembly breaks, and you're escorted to the village smithy, where a lean mare awaits harnessed to a sled loaded with supplies. You'll deliver the ewes and goats, fulfilling your atonement. As you approach the widow's homestead, a stray goat bleats, ears flicking. You crack a grin, joke 3, who knew public penance came with live sound effects. Despite the relief, an ache lingers. The law that once bound your brotherhood at arms now binds your wallet and pride. A vengeful neighbor scowls from his door hands on rafters as if he might hurl cargo at you instead of greeting. The widow watches you place 2 ewes by her fence, nodding once without warmth. You glimpse the broom girl stepping from the shadows, eyes harder now. You wonder if she secretly admires your compliance or despises that you raided her childhood. Either way, justice has little room for sentiment. As you guide the goats back toward the moot hall, you reflect on a harsher punishment: outlawry. Cast out, you'd become a ghost in your own land. No kinship, no legal recourse, a wanderer forced into banditry. Vikings who were outlawed often fled to wilderness isles or Celtic lands, eking out existence through petty theft and mercenary work. In some tales, they survived returning later with renown. In others, they vanished into shrouds of legend. Historians still argue whether outlawry fostered innovation in exile or simply spelled slow death from exposure. Scholarly debate. You'd rather risk frostbite again than face that fate. The sun dips low behind spruce, casting long shadows that tiptoe across frozen streams. You trudge back to your lean-to, pockets lighter and heart heavier. You catch your reflection in a dark window pane, pale your eyes rimmed with fatigue, beard stiff with frost. The oath ring feels loose now, as if slipping from importance. You treasure it less as a bond of glory and more as a chain of obligations. That night, the mead hall fills with laughter and boasting. Your comrades sing of the day's triumphs, horns raised high. You sip a modest cup, savoring warmth without excess. Every gulp reminds you of the price paid, silver gone, goats delivered, freedom slightly curtailed. You force a smile, clinking cups with those who escape punishment. They cheer, but you hear a hollow echo beneath their revelry. In the flickering torchlight, you replay your words in the moot famine drives courage, child's bravery, goats versus exile. The law is as unforgiving as the sea demanding its toll in silver or blood. You finger the scar on your knee from that first clash, the crude stitch still stiff, and realize that homecoming can wound deeper than any raid. Yet you remain within the circle of kin and law, spared the fate of the outcast. Tomorrow you'll join the foraging party once more, eyes peeled for supplies and scouts. The oath you swore at the fjord still binds you, even as the legal bonds press against your skin. You'll fight another day, but under the law's watchful gaze, which can redeem you or damn you in equal measure. You step back onto the longship's deck just as dawn bleeds pale yellow across the horizon, and immediately the vessel groans beneath your boots, a tired sigh after yesterday's trials. Below, you hear the drip, drip, drip of water pooling in the bilge, a relentless reminder that this sleek warship is part floating fortress, part leaky bathtub. You duck under the low gunwale boots, squelching on damp wood, and disappear into the cramped hold where the air is thick with the tang of tar-rotting wood and something you suspect might be moldy fish. Your lantern sputters to life, illuminating a world of dripping beams and sagging supplies. The longship's interior is no cozy cabin. It's a narrow crawl space where you hunch your shoulders to avoid the low roof beams. You shuffle past coiled ropes, stiff with salt, dropping your satchel and kneeling beside the bilge. A single oar rests against the hull, its blade nicked and waterlogged. You grab a ladle, nothing more than a carved wooden scoop, and begin the first of many rounds. Dip, lift, dump. Water cascades over the side in a cold spray that hits the railing, making you flinch. Joke one, at least it's not soup. Around you, the other raiders join in, forming a grim assembly line. Each man takes a turn bailing, sweat mingling with spray in a salty blur. The caulker works nearby, smearing tar and moss in the hull seams. Vikings commonly used a mixture of animal hair and pitch to seal planks, a method effective enough to let these vessels skim open seas at 20 knots, but never quite perfect mainstream fact. You watch dark clumps of moss slam into the wood, then flatten under the tar like fleas under a boot. Between scoops, you catch a whiff of that mossy, greasy scent, nature's own Band-Aid for a sinking ship. A particularly mischievous wave shakes the hull, sending your ladle tumbling. You dive to catch it, knees cracking in protest. As you rise, your lantern swings in a slow arc, casting eerie shadows that dance across dripping ribs of oak. The hold feels alive, breathing in leaks and exhaling a musty stench. You press your shirt sleeve to your nose, but it only spreads the smell like someone squeezed a dead cod over a mossy rock. Joke 2. Ode to longship, subtle yet unforgettable. A low creak echoes through the timbers as you stand. Above, the dragonhead prow creaks in response, as if mourning the decades it has spent slicing through waves. You glance at the caulker's work-neat furrows of tar glistening along the seam. But even fresh pitch can shrink and crack in cold, leaving tiny fissures for brine to invade. You rub at the tar, imagining it as stubborn scabs refusing to heal. Fringe tidbits, some sagas claim a handful of raiders would sleep with their weapons over their chests to use wrist hair as extra caulking, hardly comfortable, but apparently effective, though historians still argue whether that practice was more myth than method. You heave another ladle of brine over your shoulder, panting. Your back creaks like the hull under strain. You glance at the time carved into the mast's base, an improvised tally of days at sea, and realize you've already bailed 300 times since sunrise. There's no break for breakfast, no reprieve until the sea calms or you reach shore. Below deck, you learn 2 truths. Gravity always wins, and boats leak under the best circumstances. The entire hold trembles as you twist the ladle into the next scoop. You feel the slap of water against your forearm, and a stray drop slides down your spine, cold as a viper's kiss. Around you, muted grunts punctuate the rhythm, each man counting off strokes in a guttural chant that somehow sustains morale. You follow suit 1, 2, 3, 4, finding a perverse comfort in the mechanical repetition. A sudden shift makes the hull yaw, sending a sheet of water sloshing against your legs. You catch the ladle as it skitters across the floor, heart racing. Joke 3 ballet at sea, sponsored by the Norwegian Navy. Finally, after what feels like endless hours, the water level drops below the threshold of your ladle enough to keep the hold mostly dry, at least temporarily. The caulker slaps a final glistening strip of pitch along one seam and wipes his hands on his tunic. You stand, muscles trembling, shoulders stiff as driftwood. Your lantern flickers. The acrid smell of burned oil stings your eyes. You emerge into waning daylight to find the deck slick with spray and rain glistening on shields and oars. The helmsman barks orders into the wind, adjust the rudder, tighten the lines, stoke the stern torch. You join 3 companions in hauling a barrel of fresh water aboard an ironic luxury after endless brine. With wet boots and salt-crusted tunic, you lift the barrel onto the thwartwater, sloshing around your feet. You dip a hand inside and taste the cold sweetness, liquid gold. Moments later, you're below again, this time to patch a leaky hatch. You pry loose a handful of nails with a borrowed hammer, letting daylight flood the hold for the first time in hours. The last of the water drips off exposed beams, and you slap a wooden plank back in place. A half-used block of pine tar takes your palm as you smear it over the junction-filling gaps with sticky black goo. The bright morning reveals warped planks you couldn't see by lantern grooves where wood has shrunk and soaked. You press your palm flat, accidentally smearing tar across your sleeve. You look like you wrestled a soot monster. Above deck, the crew shouts onlookers, in this case, a pod of curious porpoises riding the bow wave. You pause, boots, muddy sleeves, dripping pitch, and wave at them as if you're on some twisted cruise line. Unlikely companions, but their sleek backs breaking water feels like a tiny victory. Quirky detail. Norse mariners sometimes believe dolphins guided lost ships to safety. Maybe these fellows are here to show you an exit from this never-ending chore. Though some scholars still argue whether such sea creature omens were earnest beliefs or sailors' tall tales to chase away seasickness. Despite your best efforts, you know the leaks will return. Timber swells and contracts with every change in temperature, and no amount of tar or moss can stop the slow seep. You feel the deck beneath you shift as a rogue wave slaps the hull from below, reverberating through the planks. You inhale deeply. The crisp, salt air stings your lungs, but it's fresher than the bilge. You climb back below, determined to catch the next drip before it becomes a flood. As midday sun filters through the hatch, you sit on a coil of rope to rest back against a mast strut. Your arms hang loose. Your head aches with the scent of tar and stale water. You close your eyes, imagining a snug cabin warmed by a hearth and the smell of freshly baked bread. Instead, you wake to another drip landing on your nose. You shake your head, clearing the delirium. This is the longship's crushing reality. Even in calm, you fight the ship more than you fight the enemy. Your comrade slides and nods and passes you the ladle. No words are needed. The tacit agreement is clear. You bail until orders change. Outside the Dragon's Head, prow cuts a lonely wake through the gray sea. The world beyond the hull is open and free, but inside you're a prisoner to leaks, mildew, and the endless battle against gravity. You clench the ladle like a sword ready for another round. And as the waves rock you gently, deceptively, so you realize this ship is both your cradle and your cell, a place where survival means embracing drudgery alongside steel and storm. Tomorrow, you might land again, face foes, and taste victory. Today, though, you conquer the mundane, bailing, patching, breathing mildew deeper than any battle cry. Because here, the fiercest enemy is time and tide, and you can't kill it with an axe. You cradle your arm against your chest as you clamber back aboard after the morning skirmish, every plank beneath your boots slick with sweat and spilled ale. One misstep, your boot slides and you crash against the ship's railing with a crack louder than any horn blast you've heard. Plain blossoms in your forearm, white hot and unforgiving, and you collapse, landing awkwardly on your other wrist. A sharp metallic taste of panic floods your mouth before you even realize you're biting your lip. A dozen hands are on you, instantly hauling you to the sheltered lee of the poop deck. You touch your forearm, gingerly bone, protruding beneath torn linen, and gasp. You probably sound like a banshee mid-brawl, but at least everyone knows you're hurt. The ship's medic really just the camp's most experienced bone setter, kneels beside you pulling a chipped whalebone splint and a leather strap from his satchel. Vikings in the 10th century commonly treated fractures with splints made of wood or bone and bound with linen or animal hide, believing the immobilization let the bone knit correctly mainstream fact. He offers you a nod that feels more like a challenge. This will hurt less than frostbite, he says. You try a weak smile, but end up wincing as he unwraps your sleeve. The cold sea breeze meets raw flesh, and you inch away until there's nowhere to go. He plunges a cloth soaked in fermented honey and nettle juice onto the wound. It stings like boiling tar, and you can't help a strangled sound slipping out. Joke 1, fermented honey and nettle juice, nature's own chiropractor. The medic mutters antiseptic as he works, though historians still argue whether Vikings truly understood infection control or if they just got lucky with honey's natural properties. Scholarly debate. Your arm throbs in reply, each pulse a tolling bell in your skull. The bone setter wedges the splint alongside your arm, aligning your wrist and elbow with practiced precision. He ties the straps tight, leather creaking like a disapproving old man's boots. You grit your teeth, reminding yourself that worse things await like bad mead or missing goats. The splint shifts with the tide's motion, and you grimace as the medic taps along your bone, checking for alignment. Above deck, the wind whistles through rigging, and a gull cries overhead. You lean against the masthead, spinning, wondering if the gull ever felt pain. Probably not. Joke 2. No screaming gulls, just a reminder that you're very human. Around you, comrades adjust sails and sharpen swords, carrying on with the raid's logistics as though nothing happened. You envy their indifference. It feels like the whole ship is watching you be reduced to a broken man. Down in the makeshift infirmary, a lean-to lined with furs and hide, you recline on stacked barrels, arm elevated on a fur cushion. A handful of herbs lie arranged on a wooden plank comfrey for mending yarrow for staunching blood, and a curious powder of dried snail shells said to soothe pain. Quirky tidbit, some raiders claimed snail shell powder helped fractured bones grow stronger than ash, though modern scholars still argue whether that remedy did more harm than good by introducing grit under the skin. Scholarly debate. A shield maiden brings you a mug of mead, spiked with valerian root, promising duller pain. The sweet liquid slides down your throat, warmth pooling in your chest. You savor the brief relief before it fades like a distant dream. Valerian was used as a sedative in Norse communities, though more often in ceremonial contexts than battlefield medicine. You chug the rest, belching gingerly, and nearly swallow a chunk of foam. Joke 3, nothing says Viking spa day like nettles and snail grit. Your mind drifts as you stare at the hide walls. You recall the oars, the flames of the last raid, the screams of the broom-wielding girl. Now you're sidelined, useless as a broken arrowhead. The bone setter hums a chant over your arm, then splashes a paste of ground pine resin over the splint's edges, an ancient waterproofing measure to keep salt spray from rotting the binding. Vikings used pine resin for everything from waterproof boots to hair gel, trusting its sticky power in damp climates. Mainstream fact. You inhale the resin's sharp aroma and wonder if you'll ever be whole again. Over the next hours, you drift between pain and slumber. Each wave that rocks the ship thrums through your arm. When you wake, the medic is seated beside you, dipping a cloth into a dark brew of plantain and bog myrtle. He presses it to your brow, cooling your fevered skin. You murmur a thanks, learning how medicine and misery share a bedside. Historians still argue whether Norse healers crossed the line into witchcraft or remained simply practical herb workers. Scholarly debate. You figure either way you'd rather have this herb brew than another dip of nettle juice. As daylight wanes, you force yourself to sit up. The camp smells of cooked fish and smoldering pitch. A meager platter slides your way, porridge of barley and goat milk, more filling than stew, but less comforting than bread. You eat slowly, savoring each gritty spoonful. Your head swims and you rest your forehead against the table, wanting nothing more than a quiet barn and a soft bed. But real Vikings deserved no comfort, only endurance. The bone setter returns, testing the splint's rigidity. He nods in approval, then hands you a length of linen thread and a small bone needle. Your job: stitch a leather cuff over the binding to keep the splint snug and guard the skin where resin rubbed raw. You sit on a barrel, the needle scratching through hide and cloth, and marvel at how a warrior's skills now serve you in suture rather than swordplay. You press the last stitch and tie off the thread, mumbling under your breath about choosing runes over runaways. Night falls, and the ship limps toward the next landing point, a rocky isle rumored to shelter wild goats and firewood. You cradle your splinted arm body wrapped in furs and listen to the creaking timbers above. Even broken, the longship remains a living beast under sail. You close your eyes for a moment and drift into fitful dreams of golden beaches and softer shores. When you wake at dawn, the world seems quieter. Your arm aches, but no longer radiates pure agony. The bone feels secure against the splint. Your makeshift casts no worse than an itchy, tight jacket. You swing your legs over the barrel and rise, testing the movement, painful but possible. A surge of something like triumph warms you. You survived a broken bone. Other warriors might brag about plundering, but you'll wear this scar as proof you endured the healer's crucible. Stepping onto the deck, you watch the isle's silhouette grow nearer. Pine trees crown granite peaks, and you imagine hacking firewood and pocketing goat's milk cheese to soothe your hunger. The bone setter catches your eye and gives you a thumbs up, an odd gesture you mimic half-heartedly. The deck groans beneath you, but at least your leg holds. Ahead lies more drudgery, landing, galloping ice fields, and foraging with one hand. Yet you brace yourself. This fracture reminded you that a warrior's greatest battles aren't always fought with steel. They're fought in quiet tents under the ministrations of scratchy healers and debated remedies. You flex your fingers against the splint, and pain flares, then subsides, leaving a dull throb that feels almost comforting. You hide a grin as you pass a comrade hauling a barrel. Need a hand, you call, and he flinches at your swagger. Splinted or not, you're back in the fight. The sun glints off your leather cuff, not tested and tar-streaked, and for now, that's victory enough. You step onto the lee of a mist-shrouded shore, the longship's dragon-head prow whispering against barnacle-scarred stone, and immediately the reality of your haul presses against you. Shackles rattle like a discordant melody as you grasp the iron links binding your captives, 24 frightened souls whose eyes flicker between defiance and despair. Their wrists are bruised, ankles raw, and every step pulls at those cruel metal arcs. You swallow hard, tasting the cold salt on your tongue, as pride and guilt wage a tug-of-war in your chest. With each footfall across slippery rock, the thralls stumble in your wake. Enslavement was a common aspect of Viking raids. By the 9th century, Norse expeditions often took prisoners to sell at markets from Dublin to Constantinople, mainstream fact. You yank at the chains to guide one hesitant woman forward. Her shawl slips, revealing a threadbare dress, and you offer a surreptitious wink that feels like mockery. She meets your gaze, eyes burning with silent rage. Joke one, if only you could trade your guilt for a slightly lighter set of shackles. Behind you, the others line up like woeful dolls' mouths, stitched shut by fear. A child clutches the hem of his mother's cloth boots, 2 sizes too large for his small feet. You can practically feel the chill of his terror, more biting than the morning air. For a fleeting moment, you imagine handing him a rattle instead of an iron cuff, something to distract him from the clinking metal. Then a gust of wind snaps you back. This is war, not some twisted nursery rhyme. You reach the top of a grassy incline where the camp's temporary pens await. Wooden spikes driven into the turf form crude barriers. You shove the woman forward and she trips knees, scraping against stone. You crouch beside her, pressing a hand to her back. Up you grunt, pulling her to her feet. The metal link bites into your glove and you hiss. Joke two, who knew gloves weren't bulletproof? The chain gang moves slowly, breath-clouding in the air like ghosts ascending into gray skies. You recall the oath ring's promise of communal sharing, yet here you are sharing suffering, not spoils. Nearby, a pair of livestock pens hold goats for tomorrow's feast. The contrast between bleeding animals and human captives gnaws at you. Thralls weren't just sold, they worked the fields, tended livestock, and even served at noble feasts, blending servitude with a grotesque hospitality. Quirky tidbit. Some Norse households trained thralls to perform basic chores like milking goats or even managing latrine buckets tasks. No free man would touch, though historians still argue whether such practices were widespread or confined to elite hall holds. Scholarly debate. You gesture to 2 burly raiders hefting a wooden yoke to secure the chains at the captives' necks. The clatter of iron against wood echoes like war drums in your skull. You catch sight of your reflection in a puddle, grimace-beard, flecked with frost eyes reddened by the haze of guilt. You push the thought away. Emotions have no currency here, only labor and negotiation. Still, your hands shake as you adjust the yoke's fit, trying to ensure a balance between control and minimal agony. Minimal being the operative word. The captives line up against a rudimentary fence, and you pace before them like a dispassionate overseer. You call roll names, you butcher as you speak them. One by one, you note condition, height, and distinguishing scars, data for the master trader who'll determine their price. You flick through a string of crude tally marks on your wrist, tallying 24 souls and 1 broken spirit. You can almost hear the scribe's quill scratching your deeds into distant log books. Joke 3, ledger management, Viking style, just swap quills for swords. A bark of orders sends 2 raiders hauling a pair forward to tend the camp's looming fires. The woman you steadied before is one of them. She gathers dry brush with trembling fingers, pain and resentment transmuted into silent compliance. You linger to watch her hands knotting wood flames, dancing across her fingers in a taunting glow. Your heart tightens. She's human, not a beast. Nearby, a bearded trader strides in furs, rustling eyes gleaming with cold calculation. He inspects the captives as though they were slabs of meat. You step forward, forcing your shoulders back and chin up. Fine stock, he murmurs, voice bubbling with avarice. He tests the iron links, shakes his head at the children's ragged cloaks. Some need scrubbing, some need healing. He says, eyeing a man whose broken wrist is nearly healed, all will earn their keep one way or another. His grin reveals stained teeth. You stiffen. The man's detachment stabs deeper than any blade. The trader attributes values: gold arm rings for young men, silver bracelets for women, copper coins for children. You nod, tallying the mental exchange: life for coin, flesh for wealth. It's a calculation that sickens you more than the morning's stale porridge. You watch as he scribes numbers, sharp strokes on parchment that will drive ledgers and fate alike. After the exchange, you follow the trader to a separate pen where a group of men is kneeling bare-chested and weary. You train your gaze on one hulking figure, eyes hooded but resolute. He sizes you up, lips curling in a silent challenge. You think of the oath ring and the bonds it forged here is the inverse bonds of iron designed to break spirit. The man in the center lifts shredded sleeves, revealing fading runes tattooed along his forearm, symbols of an oath broken or never sworn. You wonder if he too was once part of some brotherhood. Your comrade slaps your shoulder, drawing you back to the moment. Time's up, he says, voice rough with disinterest. You spring to action, hauling a half-full chain across your back, each link scorching your neck like a branding iron. Sweat beads on your brow despite the cold. You trudge back to the longship, the line of captives, following a living train of regret. The ship lies anchored in the shallow's tide, lapping at its keel. You herd the thralls down the ramp where other raiders stand with clubs and lash arrays ready to enforce compliance. The hollowness in your chest echoes with each clunk of iron against wood. You climb aboard the thralls, stumbling over wet planks, their fear rising like steam. You hold your breath, waiting for someone to scream, but only the creak of ropes and gull cries fill the morning air. Once aboard, you lock the prisoners in the hold, barricade the hatch, and turn the key noisily. Below deck, the fetid air already smells of despair. You close the hatch and lean against it, fingers pressed to your lips. You didn't cry, but your jaw aches from clenching. You lick a drop of sweat off your wrist, tasting iron. Pride fights guilt again, an endless stalemate. On deck, the helmsman calls for sails. You step away, wiping your hands on your tunic. The ship's canvas billows, wind catching like a beast in the open. You move toward the prow, letting the breeze carry you forward. Below, the thralls pound weakly, their rhythm a muted plea for mercy. You remember the broom-wielding girl, the old man's lament, the battered fields you raised. This chain gang is your harvest. As the longship drifts into open water, you gaze back through swirling mist at the fading shore. Regret uncoils beneath every breath. You wonder if the faces you bound will haunt you in dreams, or if sleep itself will elude you now that you've seen too much. Historians still argue whether the trauma of captors and captives alike left lasting legacies in Norse memory, or was buried beneath centuries of saga scholarly debate. A shaft of dawn sunlight pierces the gloom, illuminating iron and faces alike. You blink resolve settling in your bones. You are bound by chains at home and chains you impose on others. And you realize that the greatest shackles may be those laid upon your own conscience. You step onto the familiar path, winding through silver-barked birch and moss-carpeted ground, the longship's dragon-proud shadow receding behind you like a bad memory. Your satchel of silver rings and goat's cheese feels strangely light against your hip, as though the weight of regret has already claimed most of the haul. Dawn's pale light illuminates turf-roofed cottages unchanged since you first left. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, chickens peck at stray oats, and the old hearth outside the mead hall still bears burn marks from countless fires. You taste the salt of the sea and the acrid smoke of victory in the same breath. As you approach the central gathering place, you see townsfolk milling about with curious glances. Children perch on fence posts, daring each other to call out your name. A knobby-limbed elder leans on a carved staff, huffing at the sight of you. Back already, he mutters, voice rough as gravel. You open your mouth to reply, but the words die on your tongue. This homecoming feels like stepping into a paused image. Nothing moves, nothing changes, and you wonder if the world even cares that you fought across storm and snow. In the courtyard, your fellow raiders unload chests of grain furs and silver arm rings. A half-dozen villagers gather to claim debts or levy taxes, tithes, to the chieftain tolls for roads fees for shelter in winter months. You scrape your boots on the pebbled ground and join the line, handing over a handful of silver rings as owing tribute. Vikings of the 10th century often paid a tenth of plunder to their lord as a form of tax and recognition of rank, a mainstream fact woven into the very fabric of your society's economy. The chieftain's steward counts the coins with precise slaps on the ledger board eyes, never once meeting yours. Behind the steward, a baker emerges offering a thin loaf of barley bread to each returning warrior. You accept it, sniffing the crust that's hard enough to break a raven's beak. You bite into it anyway, crumbs crackle between your teeth. Joke one, at least it's not sawdust this time. The baker nods as if performing charity, though gratitude seems a foreign concept this morning. You swallow dry crumbs and put your hand to your mouth to hide your grimace. Neighbors step forward, peering at your satchel and the tatters of your furs. You expected cheers, maybe a hearty slap on the back, but instead you receive tight smiles and muted nods. A woman with silver-streaked hair, your childhood teacher, offers you a sour, sweet preserve gifted by her late husband. You taste the tartness. Her eyes flick to your scarred arm. You brought anything for the caravans of plagues and debts beside this? She asks, half joking, half accusing. You shrug, savor the preserve, and force a grin. Joke, too, who knew homecoming gifts might include metaphorical plagues. The air feels too quiet, as though sound itself hesitates. You recall how before departure children pressed coins into your palm and begged for safe return. Now they snatch at scraps of gossip. Did you really pour oil on children? Did you break the sacred fence of the blacksmith? Each rumor drifts past you like melting frost, leaving behind only a chill. Historians still argue whether early Norse communities celebrated returning raiders with feast or treated them warily due to fear of vengeance and contagion, and you can see both sides in their cautious expressions, scholarly debate. A troop of shield maidens emerges from the hall, faces bright with mead and laughter. They parade about claiming swagger and war tales in vivacious bursts. You approach, hoping for camaraderie, but they drift by like will-o'-the-wisps, drawn to bolder boasts and shinier furs. One catches your eye briefly, then turns her head to admire a scar on another's sleeve. You swallow, realize your own tales feel hollow, now that every story seems rehearsed. By midday, the courtyard fills with merchants eager to barter trades of salted fish for furs, horn cups for goat hides, runic charms for silver. You wander between stalls, fingers brushing carved wood and braided leather, searching for something to fill the emptiness. A merchant offers you a carved whistle, said to summon protective spirits' fringed tidbit. Some villagers believed that whistling on a roof ridge kept away evil shades, though modern scholars still argue whether this custom prevented hauntings or just startled your neighbors at odd hours. You turn the whistle in your palm, its sound muted by despair. You find the old well at the heart of the courtyard and peer into its dark throat. The wooden bucket swings loosely, squeaking on its rope like an old sandal. You lower the bucket, retrieve cool water, and splash your face. The reflection that greets you is a stranger's eyes rimmed with exhaustion, beard caked in ash, skin as pallid as barnacles. Joke 3, who knew a bath could feel more jarring than a gale forest gale. Standing by the well, you reach into your satchel for the pouch of silver arm rings you'd hoped would echo your valor. Instead, a single ring remains its twin companions, surrendered to steward's ledger and tribute. You slip it onto your finger, feeling the metal bite into skin. The ring's runes glint, whispering of oaths and debts. You remember the oath ring's promise made under auroras and echo, now flickering in a sky you no longer see. The ring binds you still, but not to glory. It binds you to expectation and unending demand. A horn sounds from the mead hall, calling villagers to midday assembly. You join the queue, shoulders hunched under shame, heavier than your furs. Inside, benches creak under the weight of commoners, and the chieftain's voice once more pronounces rights and responsibilities. He speaks of land grants for loyal service, new fines, for cattle rustling obligations for next winter's defense. His words drift over you like smoke, impossible to grasp. You realize that victory on foreign shores translates to more duties on home soil, and that your pause in raiding is merely a prelude to the next obligation. You slip out before the assembly ends, stepping into the spring sunlight that feels too bright, too full of life. You wander the fields beyond the village footprints, leading in and out of soggy grass. Wildflowers nod at your approach, daisies bending in silent sympathy. The chorus of bees and birds seems incongruous with your heavy thoughts. You kneel by a patch of dandelions and blow white seeds scatter like your hopes. You watch them drift across the meadow, carried by a breeze that mocks your rooted state. As dusk approaches, you return to your cottage. The hearth is cold. A mound of ashes glimmers where embers once danced. You strike flint and tinder, coaxing a flame that crackles to life, warming the hearthstone. You hang your cloak to dry and sit on the bench, the pitch-black night closing in around you. A lantern's glow flickers, casting shadows that lean like question marks. You pour a cup of watered-down mead and cradle it in both hands. The warmth seeps into your fingers, but not your heart. You stare into the liquid's amber depths and wonder if you ever truly left this place. A lone owl hoots from a distant pine, its call a reminder that solitude can be louder than battle cries. You take a long, steadying breath. Tomorrow, you'll don your furs again, sharpen your blade, and march to a new raid or foraging party. The cycle resets oath voyage, violence homecoming, obligation. Each iteration etches deeper lines into your face, each silver ring a scar on your soul. You cradle the last ring, its runes glowing faintly in the lamplight. It promises nothing but the next journey. You rise, placing the cup on a soot-streaked table, and wrap yourself in your cloak. Outside, the wind sighs over the turf roofs. You close the door, bolting it, and a part of yourself behind you. You wake before dawn, the camp still draped in silver mist as torches smolder like dying stars. Today's target isn't a foreign shore, but your own warband's campfire where whispers of missing silver stoke smolder in resentments. You roll from your furs, the cold ground biting through leather, and pad toward the longship's hull, its timbers humming with muted tension. Your breath puffs in rhythmic clouds, but every exhale tastes of suspicion. Somewhere among your brothers, someone pocketed the spoils meant to bind you in glory, and now that secret theft has planted seeds of betrayal. As you approach the row of shields propped along the palisade, you find the chieftain's steward yanking at his braided beard eyes, flicking to every man who passes. The law speaker's voice booms, reciting the ordeal by oath. Any man suspected of hiding loot must swear innocence under the sacred oath ring or face the ordeal of carrying hot iron without a cry. Vikings enforced such trials to settle disputes. The ordeal by fire was believed to invoke divine judgment, mainstream fact. You slip the familiar ring beneath your tunic, its iron cool against your chest, and heavier now with the weight of potential suspicion. A hush falls over the camp as the steward holds the missing silver pouch aloft, a puffy leather sack stained with tar and sweat. Its contents rattle with an accusing whisper. "Who donned this coin?" he demands, voice echoing off the hull. You glance at your companions, the shield maiden who's known you since boyhood, the grizzled berserker with the broken tooth, the young oarsman who still gets seasick. Each face is a mask of feigned surprise or simmering guilt. You step forward, boots sinking into frost-hardened grass. The ring's runes press into your ribs, urging you to speak truth. It wasn't me, you say, voice, even though your heart hammers like a war drum. Around you, men shift uneasily. A pungent smell of smoke from last night's bonfire clings to the air, mixing with the coppery scent of fear. Joke one who knew missing coins could smell so much like dread. The steward nods curtly and hands you a length of red-hot iron rod still glowing at one end. Swear your oath, he intones, and carry this through the warband's ring without flinching. You swallow eyes stinging from the rod's molten glare and remember tales of warriors who passed the ordeal on raw courage and those who failed and became outcasts of the spot. Historians still argue whether ordeals by fire were truly binding or served more as spectacle to shame perpetrators' publicly scholarly debate. You grip the iron with both hands, bare hands for extra honesty, and feel it scorch your palms, a blistering burn that blooms immediately. You grit your teeth, vision blurring as pain spikes. Each step toward the blood-stained stone in the center of camp is agony incarnate. Sweat beads on your brow despite the cold, and whispers ripple through the circle. He's brave, he'll crack, he's lying. Your muscles burn, snarled with nerve endings aflame, but you refuse to drop the rod. Finally, you stand before the ring medal in hand. The steward waits silent as carved bark. With a deliberate motion, you press the rod onto the stone. Searing heat radiates through bone as you hold firm. The world narrows to white-hot agony and the steady chant of your own heartbeat. You imagine you're searing a brand of truth into your very soul. At last, the steward nods, voice soft. You are true. You drop the rod. Splinters of burning ash shower your boots, and you collapse chest heaving. Joke two firewalkers have nothing on Viking oath breakers. Yet relief is fleeting. The steward proclaims your innocence, but the wider camp remains restless. The ordeal has cleared your name, but it has also inflamed suspicion in others. A hardy oarsman named Kjartan steps forward, eyes narrowed. If it wasn't you, then who? He snarls. We lose more silver each raid. Someone sells our silver to traders at Byzantium prices. Mistrust ripples like a poison through the ranks. You scan the faces, the shield maiden's lips tighten as though tasting blood. The berserker's nostrils flare and the young oarsman swallows visibly. Beneath the simmering torchlight, each man's breath steams with unspoken accusation. You suddenly realize that betrayal eats at a warband's heart more fiercely than any enemy's blade. The chieftain steps into the circle, voice low but fierce. We share our risks and rewards. If one taints that bond, he taints us all. He gestures at the longship's dragon prow carved with this warband's emblem, a snarling wolf clutching a broken sword. The wolf alone cannot hunt. It must trust the pack. His gaze sweeps the circle. We will find the traitor. Until then, every man's hand is suspect. Quirky tidbit, some sagas record raiders placing a single stolen ring into the spear shaft of the oath speaker as a test of integrity, believing the ring's hidden weight would unsettle the guilty more than the innocent. Though scholars still argue whether such subtle tricks ever occurred or were added later to romanticize warrior codes, scholarly debate. The chieftain's edict means more than sharing gold. It demands shared scrutiny. You feel eyes on you, your unflinching ordeal measured as both proof and provocation. What defense is left once you've bled through guilt's trial? In a tense hush, the chieftain orders, "At sunrise, we march to the nearest trading post. None who fears truth may stay behind." The camp erupts in clanking armor and hurried preparations, the metallic rat-a-tat echoing like hearts beating in unison. That night, you lie awake on your hide pallet furs drawn up to your chin. You taste soot and sweat, and the ember glow stains your lids. Faint torchlight slants through the thatch above as you replay the day's ordeal, the smoke, the scorching iron, the precise moment when the steward declared you honest. It should offer comfort, but instead you feel hollow, an ember extinguished in smoldering ashes of mistrust. Morning arrives in a chamber of cold pink light. You stand on deck, satchel slung over your shoulder as the longship creaks free from its mooring. The mist parts to reveal the distant silhouette of the trading post, a cluster of timber buildings with smoke curling from chimneys. Traders hail you with curious shouts. Ravens wheel overhead, their cries carrying secrets on winged currents. The oars dip into the water, and the ship glides forward like a wounded beast seeking prey. You sit brace amid the warband sword at your side, eyes scanning the shore. The missing silver is your uninvited companion, a phantom weight you cannot jettison. Joke 3. It's the heaviest pack you've ever carried. Each stroke brings you closer to commerce and confrontation, and you know that beyond the post's walls, deals will be struck that test loyalties even further. Today, allies may reveal themselves as enemies drawn by greed's undertow. As the shoreline looms, you steel yourself for bartering alongside brothers who might turn on you at the first sign of profit. Every clink of coin passed feels like a potential dagger in your back. Each handshake might conceal a knife, yet you remain bound by oath and desperation, compelled to see this through. Betrayal's seed has sprouted bitter fruit, and you realize that in the end, the fiercest struggle may not be against coastal defenders, but against the greed and doubt festering within your own circle. You take a deep breath, tasting salt and smoky torches on the wind, and step toward the trading quay. The dragon-head prow rasping against the dock's planks sounds like a warning clarion. You swallow second thought, lost to the rising tide of necessity and fear. The pack will demand answers or your life. You step off the trading quay and onto a winding dirt track that cuts through fields once green with promise, but now lie in mournful ruin. The damp mist clings to your cloak as you walk, each footfall sinking into mud-stiffened furrows. The air carries the faint tang of rotting grain and dried straw, an odor so bitter you taste it on your tongue. Around you, scarecrows lean like haggard sentinels, arms outstretched in silent accusation. Even the ravens circle warily, their caws subdued. You pat the satchel at your hip, empty of coin, but heavy with conscience, and trudge onward toward the heart of this agricultural wasteland. Rows of stunted stalks stand in jagged lines, their seed heads shriveled and gray rattling like bones in the breeze. Frost scars crisscross the earth, gouged by sudden freezes that arrived unannounced last autumn, turning fertile fields into brittle shards. You kneel by a patch of cracked soil and scoop up a handful. Dust drifts from your palm motes dancing in the pale dawn light. A distant church bell tolls its hollow notes, mingling with the whisper of wind, an eerie hymn for the hungry. Joke one, if only you could harvest a miracle instead of barley. This region once thrived on barley oats and rye staples brought inland from Viking grain trade routes as far south as Francia, so a single failed harvest could doom entire hamlets to famine mainstream fact. You recall how ovens once brimmed with flatbreads, their crusts steaming under cloth. Now you press your cheek to a straw-thin loaf creaking in your satchel, its trail of crumbs the last remnant of a meal. You imagine a farmer's daughter slipping a few kernels into her apron on market day. Those kernels would have fed her family for a week, but here they lie squandered by weather's whim. You stand and continue passing a ruined granary whose beams sag under the weight of mildew. A local fiddler once told you that some farmers baked surplus barley cakes so thin and hard they doubled as roof shingles in a pinch of fringed tidbit that sounds clever until you picture soggy shingles on a rainy day. Historians still argue whether such ingenious anti-famine hacks were widespread or simply the invention of wandering minstrels embellishing tales around tavern fires. Scholarly debate. Either way, you wouldn't want to sleep under a barley roof. Further on, you find a shallow pond where wind-whipped ripples disturb the reflection of dead reeds. Frogs once croaked here in chorus, but now silence reigns. You kneel at the water's edge, submerge your hands, and cup the icy liquid clean, but lifeless. A lone reed scratches across the surface like a fingernail on wood. You grip the water and let it slip through trembling fingers. Joke to water so clear you'd swear it was served in a goblet. Too bad it won't grow crop. As you rise, your stomach gnaws with hunger sharper than any storm-lashed wave. You slap your pouch once overflowing with silver rings, but no wealth can buy back a failed season. You realize raids won't solve these shortages, stolen grain spoils in transit, and barter only shifts scarcity elsewhere. The coin you covet is meaningless against empty fields. You turn your back on the granary boots, crunching hollow stalks, and steel yourself for the long walk home, if home still holds any welcome. At the road's crest, you pause beneath a skeletal oak, its branches gnarled like arthritic fingers. Under the canopy, tufts of thorny weeds choke the furrows where seeds were sown. You drop to one knee, placing your hand on the bark's rough surface as if seeking counsel from an ancient spirit. Instead, you find nothing but bark and regret. The wind picks up scattering brittle husks across your path like forgotten prayers. Joke 3, who knew the harvest festival would be held by ghosts of crops past it, you trudge back to the quay, shoulders stooped under the weight of realization climate's wrath cannot be raided away. You glance at the longship, its dragon head perched like a sentinel against the sky, and understand that each voyage demands sacrifice, but may yield nothing more than hollow triumph. Hunger has deeper roots than any sword can reach, and you can't plunder a solution from the earth's own betrayal. You lie awake beneath a pale sliver of moon, the hush of the frozen fields pressing in like a silent accusation. The longship's silhouette drifts at anchor in the nearby inlet, its shadow a dark promise against the still waters. Your breath puffs in rhythmic clouds, each exhale a little prayer you no longer believe. Somewhere in the distance, the mournful call of a lone wolf cracks the night, an echo of your own howling doubts. You roll onto your back, tracing constellations you half remember from childhood, and feel the weight of unending violence settle in your bones. A glance at your satchel reminds you of yesterday's foray, 24 captives metal on skin, and the trader's cold gaze sizing souls like livestock. Chains and slaughter all spun into profit and pride. You close your eyes and recall the hollow homecoming that followed the chieftain's lament over strayed debts, the field of famine that no coin could mend. Regret coils tighter with each memory, a serpent refusing to uncoil. Yet dawn brings one more trial, the long march to the next raid, another crucible of blood and toil. You stand and stretch, joints cracking like splintered wood. The air is so cold, it bites at your lungs when you inhale. You tug your cloak tight and make your way to the campfire where fellow raiders stir sleeping gear and hoist axes with practiced efficiency. The chieftain strides among them, his gait-measured eyes scanning faces for tiredness or treachery. You catch his gaze and nod, no words needed. His nod back is curt, reminding you that in this life speech is spare and action unending. The morning's target is a riverside settlement rumored to hoard salted fish and hides. Raiders once called this place Merkvarg's Hold, after the black wolf spirit said to guard its docks. Quirky tidbit locals believed the wolf's howling warned of impending raids, though some scholars still argue whether Merkvarg was a real shaman's totem or a myth spun to frighten children's scholarly debate. Either way, superstition thickens the air as you trudge through knee-high frost and cracked reed beds. Ahead, a line of wooden mill wheels creaks beside a sluggish river, their paddles still in icy stasis. The entire settlement seems asleep beneath a glaze of frost smoke curling from the chimneys in lazy spirals. A rotten fish stench hangs low, promising both bounty and hazard. You swallow hard. Nothing tastes sweeter than victory, but nothing stings sharper than the knowledge that victory here means poor bargaining power for your conscience. At a discreet signal, raiders fan out, encircling the smoke-wreathed village. Your roll cut off any escape along the riverbank, ensuring no trader or fisherman slips through to warn others. You wade into icy shallows, leather boots soaked instantly, feeling each toe go numb. The river's current tugs at you like an invisible hand, reminding you that water claims many lives long before swords do. Joke one, at least you've always wanted cold feet. On the opposite bank, a lone fisherman scrambles as he spots the battle cry horns. He casts his net aside, netted fish flopping in abandoned chaos. You sprint across shallow currents, boots squelching, and snatch the net. He pleads in guttural dialect, arms, extended voice cracking like thin ice. You shove him back toward the crowd of raiders. He collapses in a heap, face drawn and pale. Behind you, traders clutching salted fish barrels pour from the storehouses. Shields clash, axes ring, and in the melee, flesh meets steel with practiced violence. You hack at a barrel's lock, prying it free and prying open a barrel with your boot. The tang of brine and fish oils hits you, and you fill your satchel with pickled herring and cod. You pause, tasting the air. This bounty will feed half your war band for a night. But at what cost to your soul? Historians still argue whether Viking raids on fishing hamlets aimed more at sustaining war bands or crippling local economies. But here, you feel both motives intertwine in each salted catch mainstream fact. You heft a barrel of dried hides onto the shore, feeling the weight of both material gain and moral debt. Each hide is a once living creature tanned under the sun you haven't seen in weeks. A child peeks from behind a fence post, eyes wide as saucers. You pause, meeting his gaze. He holds a wooden flute, its notes silent, now mouth pressed tight. Your fist clenches around a herring. The fish's scales glint like abandoned armor. You consider tossing him a morsel, but the moment slips away. The boy retreats shadows, swallowing his form. You realize no child of yours would stand watching their world crumble without a word, yet here you stand silent. You turn back to the barrels and fish-strewn shore. Your comrades load the longship, their laughter hollow and mechanical. You load your satchel and secure it, feeling the fish bones scrape against fabric. The life in this village is harvested for survival. Your own life is harvested for glory. Both feel equally hollow. As the longship pulls away, you stand at the prow, salted air whipping your face. The frozen settlement recedes, flickering torches reduced to pinpricks of light. You press a fist to your chest where the oath ring lies and whisper a vow you can't feel. I will endure. You stand at the bow as the longship drifts into a silent anchorage beneath the sky alive with auroras, sinuous streams of emerald and violet dancing above like celestial serpents. The chill air bites at your cheeks, sending tremors through your bones, yet your limbs feel strangely heavy, as if the weight of every deed you've done is anchored to you. Above the lights, shimmer in slow paroxysms, and for the first time, you hesitate in your march toward the next raid. The promise of glory feels hollow here, under that rippling curtain of color. Your satchel of salted fish and hides rests at your feet, the spoils of countless battles, yet you scarcely notice. You're more absorbed in the hush that blankets the fjord, broken only by the longship's gentle creak and the faint drip of meltwater from the oars. A single gull calls somewhere beyond the prows, its cry a lonely punctuation in the vast stillness. You inhale deeply, tasting frost, and pitch the acrid tang of burned offerings from last night's vigil, mingling with the brine of the sea. You remember the oath ring heavy against your heart when you first pledged yourself at the fjord's mouth. Back then you thought it bound you to honor and valor. Now you feel it binds you to regret and unrest. Around you, your comrades pack away gear in silence, eyes glazed with exhaustion or avoidance. Even the berserker, notorious for his feral grin, stands quietly, shoulders slumped, as if the trance has lifted and left him bare. You step forward, boots crunching on the frost-hardened deck planks, and it echoes through the stillness like a verdict. A lantern's glow flickers from the stern, casting long shadows that twist and blend with the midnight palette. The longship's dragon-head prow seems to leer at you, eyes gleaming with unspoken accusation. You grip the railing wood slick with condensation and feel the grain press into your palms. Joke 1, surprising how a dragon's glare can intimidate a grown warrior more than a shield maiden's glare ever did. Nearby, a barrel of fresh spring water sits half buried in ice. You bend to scoop a handful of water, spilling through your fingers in crystalline rivulets. It's the purest taste you've known in weeks. No salt, no smoke, no spoilage. For a moment, you imagine returning home with nothing but this water in your flask, trading furs and fish for the simplicity of a cool stream. But that vision dissolves as quickly as the water trickles away. You sip the remainder, letting the chill trail down your throat like a second wind. The auroras intensify, weaving patterns so intricate they could be carved runes. You catch yourself tracing their arcs with a fingertip as if you could etch meaning into the sky. Quirky tidbit Viking skalds sometimes claimed the lights were the shields of Valkyries riding to the battlefield, though historians still argue whether such imagery was poetic license or genuine belief. Scholarly debate. You half smile at the thought of Valkyries gliding overhead, banners aflutter, surveying your raid. Your gaze drifts to the shore where the settlement you raised lies dark and empty. No smoke curls from chimneys, no lanterns wink in windows, only ashes and frost remain. You shudder, remembering the girl's wooden flute, the old man's plea, the farmer's broken back. Each memory feels like a shard, piercing your ribs. The aurora's glow seems almost mocking their ephemeral beauty, contrasting with the permanence of your action. You lean your forehead against the dragon's prow, taking solace in its cold solidity. The carved scales are smooth beneath your brow, familiar and unyielding. Joke 2. At least a ship won't beg for mercy. You close your eyes and whisper a half-formed apology to the night wind, though you know it carries no answers. A distant rumble, perhaps thunder rolling across unseen mountains, or the creak of ancient ice shifting, jolts you back to awareness. You realize the cold is seeping through your cloak, frosting the ends of your beard. There's a bitter clarity in that cold. No amount of raiding will warm your heart now. You open your eyes to find the other raiders staring at you as if you'd broken a silent pact by pausing. The chieftain's voice drifts over the hush. Tomorrow we sail again. It's not a question. It's a decree. You nod, shoulders aching with the weight of inevitability. The longship's prow snaps forward, carving lines through mirror-calm water. You step back, allowing the vessel's momentum to nudge you into motion. As the bow turns away from the anchorage, you catch one last glimpse of the auroras, their brilliance fading with distance. You swallow, tasting both salt and sorrow, and feel resolve harden beneath regret. The chain of raids will continue tide after tide, winter after winter, until nothing remains of innocence but stories whispered by the wind. You take a final breath of the frigid night and follow the chieftain's retreating silhouette down the deck. Each footstep echoes like a heartbeat in the cold expanse. The auroras may fade, but their reflection lingers in your mind, a spectral reminder that every triumph is tinged with loss. Now the sky has settled into a muted twilight. The aurora's dance relinquishing its brilliance to a softer glow. The longship drifts in gentle swells, the creak of timber a lullaby beneath the hush of dark waters. You press a hand against the smooth hull, feeling each pulse of movement as a tender reminder of life's unceasing rhythm. The air, once sharp and biting, has softened into a cool caress that brushes your skin like a whispered promise. Close your eyes and breathe slowly. Inhale the scent of pine smokiness, faint in the distance mingled with the sweet, clean perfume of melted snow. Each breath brings warmth back into your chest. Let the steady heartbeat of the ship beneath your palm guide your thoughts into calm waters. The frenzy of raiding, the clang of steel, the hunger, and the howl of wind all drift away now on the evening tide. Feel the cloak's weight slip from your shoulders as the chill dissipates. Imagine the hull as a cradle rocking you toward rest. The salt tang on your lips fades into a gentle hint, a reminiscence instead of a reminder. Awareness dims to twilight. The glare of torches subsides, replaced by soft pinpoints of starlight. You might wonder what tomorrow holds: another raid, another debt, another dawn. But for now, surrender to peace. Allow the quiet lapping of water against wood to ease each muscle, each thought. The sky's last hues melt into inky velvet, and you are held within its fold. Rest here on this vessel of memory and regret until sleep drapes its gentle curtain over your mind. The trials of yesterday and the dawn's demands may return, but they can wait. Tonight, you are simply a traveler in a calm sea of dreams, buoyed by the promise of renewal that follows every storm. End of script. Sweet dreams.